Welcome to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living. Join me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, for real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal, how to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and masculine, you learn how to harness the power of relationship and the mirror to befriend your shadow and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
Together, working at a practical level, you learn to trust that everything that is happening is for you, your growth, and ultimate freedom.
Our circumstances don't matter. It's only how we relate to them that does.
Get ready to befriend the wisdom of your body and the power of your mind.
Break Free and Trust starts now.
Hey, welcome to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living. I'm Chris.
And I'm Jacqueline.
It seems that somewhere in the recent past, using the word God has become provocative and maybe even perhaps triggering in our modern discourse. And I think Jacqueline and I have immediately noticed our own verbal gymnastics at times as we have done our own clunky linguistic dance by substituting universe, the divine, the beloved, source, spirit, creator, etc., in sort of conditioned avoidance to saying the word God to our students, clients, and even our listeners. Like, what's up with that? And why does this language seem to matter so much in this case? Are all these differences or all these different terms not just ineffable concepts too? Can Jack and I learn to be fearless in our language? And what does the experience of God mean to us? All this and more in the next hour, so buckle up. And for live viewers, the show will be open to questions in the second half of the show. So either put your questions in the chat or, as always, call in at 1-800-930-2819. So I'm really interested in where this conversation takes us because it's very open-ended and you didn't really know what we're talking about today. I sort of sprung this one on you. So I'm going to put you in the hot seat by asking you a personal question to get it going. Do you avoid using the word God when you're working with clients, teaching, or doing podcasts? Be honest.
Be honest. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You know, yes and no. Like in the past, absolutely. I would use words. I know that in teaching yoga, I often use tuning into the teacher within instead of God, because I think it's something that people would is more digestible and more relatable. With clients and with students, I'll use the word God, and I think my heart starts to race a little bit every time I'm about to say it, but I'll immediately say, or the divine, or source, or the universe, or nature, if that's how you relate to it. Sort of drawing them into something that's bigger than just them alone. So absolutely, yes. And you asked the question at the beginning, or you spoke it so beautifully, is can we challenge ourselves to be really courageous and just use the word? And that's sort of where I'm at now.
Yeah. Okay.
More and more, because I'm spending more and more time working on my own relationship with God. And that feels like a word that I want to bring more and more into my vocabulary. But I went for a run this morning, and while I was running, I was thinking about this podcast because, often Chris and I will talk about these podcasts ahead of time, and the extent of our preparation often is to go for a walk or a run in the forest and have a conversation about it. But this time, because we were both really busy with work and other things, we didn't have a chance. And so I knew what the topic was. So I was running and I was thinking about it for a minute, and I burst into laughter as I was thinking about the very thing that you just brought up, which I hadn't heard until right now. Because I think one of the reasons that we're really challenged by using the word God is because that means that we are talking about something that goes beyond our free will. We grow up learning how to be, and we've said this so many times, to achieve, to be successful, to, learn how to train our bodies so we can perform in sports, train our minds so we can perform in school, train our minds and bodies so we can perform in the workforce. All of that energy is directed to how we as individuals are functioning in this world. to talk about God means that we need to talk about something other than ourselves,
Right.
something that is not about our egos, something actually where in most conversations we would be surrendering our ego to, but we spend lives fighting so hard to develop those egos that to have that conversation is actually challenging.
Yeah. So I think I agree. There's that aspect. I hadn't thought about that aspect. That's quite interesting. Why? Yeah. Okay. I'm I'm the god of my own universe. I'm in charge. I'm going to create all this stuff like that. So I'm not going to invoke something outside of myself. Yeah, that is legitimate. But what about for us though, who have gone through this place of, okay, I am surrendering to God, yet now I'm still finding myself, I catch myself all the time, like about to say that. And so I change it to something that I'm going to feel is going to be more acceptable out there because there's something triggering about that word God. What is it about? Maybe I have to answer it myself, but what am I fearing about the collective response to that and why?
So I actually want you to answer that
Yeah.
question, but I want to clarify it a little bit.
Yeah.
When you're sitting down and having conversations with me or people that you work really closely with who have come to know who you are and what the message is that you have to share, do you qualify it? Or do you
No.
use the word God?
I use the word God.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's in conversations with people at large that you might not have a sense of where they sit, that you don't have a temperature on them yet. You don't know what they believe or don't believe in. And then that word becomes a challenging word to work with, or one that you actually have to question how you use. Yes?
Yeah. Yeah.
So what do you think that is for you?
I think it's like it's fear. It's fear for sure, and it's fear of a collective response and a collective judgment, right? And I've had this, early on when I started writing blogs, I had this experience which was, um, I would quote various, spiritual teachers, the Buddha, Nanak, Jesus, Confucius, or whatnot. But every time I would like quote Jesus, and he says whatever my relation to Jesus is, he says some cool metaphysical stuff. I would get community noted by like your post is outside the framework of our community notes of our
You actually also at that
yeah.
time, which is really interesting, got into a pretty deep conversation with me where I said to you, your message is really important. And I wonder if you could adjust your language so that you could appeal to a broader audience because people are going to react
Yeah.
to the word Jesus and the word God. And I'll never forget your response in that moment because it really struck me as integrous, but also really courageous and not fearful, which was, this is my message. I'm not changing it.
Yeah. Yeah, and in that form I don't. And it's interesting, but other forms I do, and I think that's where this topic of the podcast came up because if I'm in a room and I'm speaking, and if I say the word God, I see the shifting, I see the reaction. But if I say the word universe, everyone just nods along. Or if I say source, everyone just nods along. There's something about that word God that creates a reaction, a different reaction in all sorts of different people that stems from something somewhere.
Well, I mean, I am not deeply schooled in theology. I have studied lots of different things, but that's definitely not my expertise. But I would say that the word God in the Old Testament was it was a challenging God.
Mm.
It's a punishing God. There's a lot of right and wrong, good and bad. And I believe that a lot of people have a visceral reaction to it and to religion, as religion has been taught to many of us over time. And so I would assume actually that that's where a big part of the reaction is coming from.
Yeah, from some. And that, interesting. It certainly shows up in places like recovery, where the 12 steps invoke the word God, and people that have come from a Judeo Christian background who are still alcoholic or addicted and have tried to use a God, or like they're pushed away by it because no, I've tried that. That doesn't work. And I think they invoke that image of a czar of the heavens or something like that in that template. So it pushes them away. But it's broader than that, I think.
So why don't you share with us what you think?
I think the big fear, like as I've sat with it, it comes from it's this fear that's our primal fear of being excluded and not being part of the tribe. I think we've moved very much from a spiritual society to one that's hyper materialistic. Mm. And the elites, or the people that are at the top of the society, are it's almost like materialism and science, and I'm using air quotes for the word science, are the new religion and the new dogma. So to invoke something that's outside of that, it's almost like it's judged, it's ridiculed, it's not taken seriously. And by saying the word God, you're now taken seriously. You're diminished because you're invoking something that's not rooted in measurable material aspects of things.
So I think you're onto something there. And yet we find that, and we both know this in our practices, is that we can snub the word God for a very long time. But all of a sudden, oftentimes, not always, but oftentimes, when something happens that's out of our control, that our materialism cannot change, that no amount of money, no amount of education can shift, like health. And we're brought to a place where we are helpless on some level. It doesn't matter whether you're the Tsar of Russia or the Queen of England or, the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. All of a sudden, you're brought to a place where you need something bigger than you to look to because you don't have capacity to shift something. And at some point, we all seem to turn to that.
In those moments, if we've had that experience.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And so when you stand up in a room where you're doing, you're in a fellowship and you're doing 12-step work or anything else, you're surrounded by people who have been brought to that place. And so they're willing to give up some of their control, all of their control, to something else. They're willing to surrender. This place, I'm coming back to what I spoke originally, actually, which is we live in a society where we're meant to stand out as special, mm-hmm. as apart from, as different. I have this talent. I have this skill set. You need to turn to me for this. And that goes really countercurrent to what God consciousness is really about. Because God consciousness says that we're all one. We're all an expression of the one. And that makes us not very special. And yet, or that makes us not uniquely special.
Yeah. So we're triangulating the same thing. I'm saying that the collective conditioning is one of materialism, and you're saying from the individual basis, the individualism is also materialistic in that I am achieving these things. It's by me. I'm making it happen, and the collective is also saying it's a materialistic world.
That's interesting because it's true. I'm achieving these things. It's all because of me that this stuff is happening. And yet, as soon as something goes wrong, that same mentality says it's your fault.
Yeah, that's right.
So I can own that all of the great things that are happening in my world are happening because of my unique set of talents, strengths, and skills. But anytime something goes wrong in my world, I move into a blame victim scenario where it's somebody else's fault. I can't own any of that because if I did, then it would be because I lacked something rather than being able to actually stop and actually question the bigger picture. I don't know if I'm making any sense.
You are, in fact, I got that shiver in my spine because you're really onto something here. Is that it's a bit in listen for this? It's this material basic. It's either happening by me or it's happening by you or it's happening somewhere else in this material plane. It inevitably leads us into the victim blame cycle. which is so much of what our society is based on.
Yep.
It's the hero, the villain, and the victim going round and round and round is sort of, I would say, like 80% of humanity resides.
And so then to step into God consciousness, or yeah, I would say God
Yeah.
consciousness, actually brings us back to something that we spoke about in a much earlier podcast, which was this question of that one of the biggest questions that we can ask ourselves is, do we live in a benevolent universe? And that question really assumes that if I live in a benevolent universe, then everything that happens in my life is for me. That means that the job that I acquire is for me. That means that my falling on the sidewalk is for me. That means that the sickness that shows up in my body is for me. It you you don't get the opportunity to, if you take that mentality, then it's not just that certain things are for me, it's that everything is for me. And there's something that happens in that mentality that actually opens us up beyond our own individual capacities into trusting in the flow of the way life works. And there's something in that that is incredibly challenging for us as human beings who've grown up in a very material world. Um, it's incredibly challenging for us, but there's also a deep sense of liberation, freedom, and curiosity that comes from that very same mentality. And there's something there for me where there's like a there's a there's a deeper, there's a deeper sense of power that shows up that's beyond me and my own body. Hmm?
Yeah, but I think I think that is the question. But there's a stage before you ask that question, which is that I think where that line we're talking about, where there's maybe I think if I think about it this way, it's quite possible if we live in a very material society, if you intellectualize God, it makes no sense. If you had the experience of God, of course, it makes perfect sense. So once you've had the experience of God, you can ask the question: is it benevolent or malevolent? But if you're just intellectualizing the concept, that's the leap that's not happening. It's contempt prior to investigation.
Yeah.
There's not an openness to this concept that there's something greater than ourselves that participate. We'll get into what that means later, but something greater than ourselves is driving it, and it is me doing this, and it's me in conflict with everything around me and driving myself forward. Is how the universe operates. It's materialist. We're an accident. We just a whole bunch of chemicals got together, and here we are today. And I don't need this God concept. In fact, I have contempt for it.
So, can I share a story?
Please.
Um, about 15 years ago, um, I was in a really tough place. My marriage had fallen apart. My ex-husband was going through a tremendous amount of health challenges. Our house was upside down. Kids were really struggling. And I got to this place where my own superwoman sort of way of being in the world, I was ready to retire her. I was tired of being superwoman. It wasn't working for me. It wasn't working for me anymore. And in fact, I was so depleted and exhausted that I reached out to a very dear friend and asked her for help. And she was coming over to do some body work on me, just to fill me up a little bit. She showed up at my door and she showed me a picture. She said, something is telling me I'm supposed to show you this. And the picture was a picture that in some schools of thought is called the I am presence. And essentially it was a photo of an earthly version of a woman and a heavenly version of a woman. And all of this energy was coming through the crown of the earthly version of the woman from the heavenly version. And Jung often talks about how a picture can have a very, very deep impact on our psychology. Well, I've been moved by pictures, I've been moved by art, but I've never had an experience like this. What happened in that moment, take it or leave it, I'm just going to share my experience, was without understanding what I was looking at, all of a sudden, the point at the top of my head, which is known in yoga as the crown, um, started buzzing. And I felt so much energy flood my body. And it was as if something like somebody snapped their fingers, which is a very strange experience if you've never had anything like that happen to you before. And while there's one foot that I've lived in the energetic and spiritual world since I was quite young, the other foot and most of my body lived in a different world, a much more mainstream world. And I couldn't understand what happened. And it was going on for weeks. And all of a sudden, I had this sort of, I'll use the word awakening. I've never used that word before, actually. You use it all the time. Was this awareness that everything that I had been pushing through, trotting through, working through to raise my 3 kids, to deal with the circumstances of my life, to work, to study, to do all of that, I had been doing as an individual separate from the world at large. Now, as an individual separate from my friends, no, not really. As an individual separate from my family, no, not really. But I had this sense that I was alone. Like I had to make all of this stuff happen. And I was empty. And what happened during that moment was it was as if I had a visceral memory that I was connected to something much bigger than me. And all I needed to do was allow. In that moment, I allowed, we'll use the word God, to enter. And
is that
that
the word
moment,
you'd want to use, though? You don't have to.
I'm not sure that it's the word that I would use then.
Right.
Then it was as if I allowed energy to come through. Now I would absolutely say that I allowed God to come through. And I think in that moment, what I recognized or became aware of was that I wasn't a wave alone in the ocean. I was the ocean. And something shifted for me there. But my shift into this realm was very slow. It's not like in that moment, all of a sudden, my whole life changed. In that moment, a door opened. But I've been playing with that door for a while.
Like have you been open to what was your reaction to the word God before that? Like through your whole life? Like how did you relate to God? Yeah.
So I didn't grow up religious. I would say I grew up a little bit more spiritual than I did religious. And honestly, I think that the deepest connection that I had to God was through watching and observing my mom. Mm-hmm. Because my mom really turned to God when she was diagnosed with cancer. And a relationship that I didn't know, that didn't exist for her beforehand, really solidified then. But it was sort of outside of me. I'm not sure that at that time I believed in a benevolent universe. I was me. I was just a me in this world, operating with whatever energy I had in order to make it through. And over time, and when I say over time, I mean over time. Like I'm not that moment happens like the snap of a finger. But this process has been a very slow process for me of turning toward God, and of letting go of my need to be in control of everything that's happening in my life. Your shift was much different than that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
What was your relationship with God prior to that moment of being really brought to your knees through addiction?
Yeah, and it's a great question. That's why I'm thinking back to what I've already said, and I'm on this podcast. I'm sounding harsh towards people who are not open to the word God, because I'm talking about myself.
Yeah.
That is exactly, if I go back, now if I go back like 8 years ago, I'm sort of this exact stereotype that I'm thinking about, where I was, if someone used the word God, I would immediately dismiss it as hocus pocus. I would diminish them in my view. It had, I would totally rejected it. And although I don't think I would have called myself an atheist, I was pretty close. I was probably agnostic, because I had a slight bit of open mindedness, and there might be something I don't understand. But I certainly had no time for it in my life. I was too busy playing God of my universe, and I was making things happen, and I was in charge. And it wasn't up to chance; it was up to my skill and my, you know, my talent, and a little bit of luck, but nothing I would have attributed to God. And the fact, like, with you know a little bit of shame and lots of humility, I look back. I was my ex-wife was Catholic, and she was practicing. She'd go to church, and I would mock it, and I wasn't open to it, and it was sort of right there in front of me all this time, and I pushed it away, because I was very much wrapped up in this agnostic, atheist, hyper materialistic view of the world, that there wasn't anything outside myself that was making it happen. And it was either I was doing it, or I was blaming others for why it wasn't getting done. And so that was my experience. And I would hold people in contempt that would talk about God or attribute things to God. And I looked at God as went part and parcel with religion. I don't think I understood what spirituality was. I thought God was religion. To me, religion was a method of control. It was to get people to do certain things. It's why wars were fought. It was why people died all over the world. That's what I thought God was. And that's why I reacted so strongly to it, or just rejected it outright.
You just said something interesting. So from that standpoint, to believe in God or turn toward God would mean letting go of control.
100%. Yeah.
And do you think that our need to control is part of what gets in the way of us actually having any kind of belief in God?
Yeah. I think it's the primary thing that gets in the way, because we want to control our environment to be safe. And if it's not within our control and it's out of our control, we don't feel safe.
Okay.
And I think we're also very conditioned to try to control our environment. I mean, that's the purpose of our upbringings, to learn how to manipulate and control our environment, get the outcomes we want in terms of money, partners, status, achievements, possessions. That's all about controlling our materialistic environment to get these things that we're supposed to get in life, to make us somebody that's important. And there's nothing about God that exists in there.
And in that process of becoming somebody, what we're actually seeing, at least with the people that we're working with and the people that we're engaged with, is that once all of those achievements have been acquired, there's actually still something deeper that people are longing for and wanting. And they recognize that they get to this place where they have everything they thought they ever wanted, but they're not actually content.
No.
And I find it incredibly interesting in my work that most of these like thresholds that we get to, whether they're graduating from university, they're midlife, they're all of a sudden we've turned 70, whatever it is there are these places where all of a sudden there's a door that is beckoning us to walk through, and we either enter it or we don't. But it's not a door that stops. It's like the knock doesn't go away. We keep getting knocked at to wake up to something. And I wonder if what we're being asked to wake up to is God.
And let's take a break here, and I'll come back and I'll tell a waking up to God story.
Okay.
Okay.
Tune in to Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living with me, Jacqueline.
And me, Chris, on Transformation Talk Radio, every second and fourth Monday at 3 p.m.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and to heal, and how to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Witness the field of potential that arises when you take personal responsibility and become the divine creator in your own life.
Visit theway-healing.com for more information.
If you're looking to create more joy, energy, fun, and good health in your parenting, especially if you have a personal or family history of cancer, I invite you to tune into the Intentional Wellness Parenting Show every third Tuesday of each month at 11:30 a.m. Pacific, 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, with me, Orally Cormier, and Dr. Pat will help you to create healing and wellness every living day. We want you to succeed, and this show will help you do just that.
Are you ready to listen to your soul? Discover the power of pausing and turning in on Our Soul Whisper with Kathy Belmont and Dr. Pat. This sacred show offers a safe space for self-discovery, healing, and soulful transformation. Let your inner voice rise, be heard, and gently guided into expression. Tune in every first and third Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific on Transformation Talk Radio. Subscribe now so you never miss the whisper meant just for you. Visit OurSoulWhisper.com.
What if your training isn't enough? The Multicultural Mindset Podcast invites counselors and therapists to unlearn the one-size-fits-all approach. This isn't cultural competence. It's a way of being that brings racialized experiences from the margins to the very center of care. Let's stop pathologizing Black pain and start challenging the system that created the bias in the first place. Visit newseasons.training to subscribe.
Welcome back, everybody. So, Chris, you kind of left us with a cliffhanger right before the break. Mm-hmm. You want to share the story you were talking about?
Yeah. Well, you set it up really well in the sense that, I like to use the term sometimes, I'd squeezed all the juice out of pride, right? Up until that point where I'd set out to achieve these things in all these aspects of my life. And those things happened and more, and they kept continuing. But somewhere in there, as things were, looking phenomenal on the outside and getting better, something inside me was just really falling apart. There's just this emptiness that started to emerge that we can put labels on it like melancholy, depression. It doesn't really matter. It was an emptiness. It was a tank growing empty. And you talk about these wake-up calls, right? Like these things where like the universe, God, I use God, it's right. See, I caught myself there. I wanted to say the universe. God comes knocking. And, near-death experience, like massive back pain, head issues, like all these things now, when I look back in hindsight from a different perspective, I'm like, oh yeah, that all came in that period. I was all trying to tell me, you need to change, you need to change, you need to change. And as things even got hard mentally, and I got moved into like alcoholism and addiction, all I did was double down on all the things I was doing in that same direction of achievement.
If I ask you a question, will I interrupt you?
No.
Okay. I just want to qualify something.
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure that in my viewpoint anyways, that God knocking is you need to change. Mm. You need to let go of your grip.
Yes. Okay.
Right? Like you need to let go of being in control of the way things happen and step back a little bit.
Right.
That's different than you're bad, you need to change.
Right. That's a good. Yeah. You need to let go of the thing, whatever you've gotten yourself into, it's not working for you. You're not finding the peace you're looking for. Yeah. So maybe, let go. Maybe allow something else to happen versus just continue on doing what you're doing. And so within that, didn't hear the call, and ultimately get to this place where the knock's super loud and everything just falls apart in my life. And it was in that moment, in that place of recognizing that, okay, I've doubled down on this, I've tripled down on this. All my ideas have just made things worse for the last X number of years. And I'm in this place where I'm ready to, I totally give up. I can't do this anymore. I'm going to surrender to something different. And that thing is what I call God now. I didn't have a specific version of what God was. It wasn't a Judeo-Christian God. It might have been more of a Sikh God at that time, gosh, because I was exploring everything. It was just God as an ineffable concept that it's not me. It could have been that chair over in the corner. I would have given up control of my life and my will to that chair in the corner because I was going to have a better outcome at that stage than doing it myself. It was that straightforward. And as soon as I made that surrender, that statement that I said out loud, I felt this complete rush of peace into me. And this connection was something I'd never connected with before. I had the experience of God profoundly in that moment that's continued with me and grown ever since that. And there's no way for me to intellectually explain it. No one could have intellectually explained it to me before. I would have rejected anyone telling me they had that experience intellectually, but here I am having had it. And from that place, I've let God into my life in every aspect that I've not just surrendered in this area. I've tried to surrender and continue to surrender in all areas of my life, and recognizing that I don't want to run any of my life on self-will. I want to run my life on what I call God's will now. And since I've done that, every aspect of my life has turned out better. Not necessarily on a material plane, but on the spiritual plane and how I feel inside in terms of the amount of peace, happiness, and joy I carry all the time.
So there's so much to respond to that, but what I really hear at the center of that is my outside world may not have changed. My financial world may not have changed. My job might not have changed. My physical health maybe even might not have changed. But what's changed tremendously is my internal world and the sense of peace and calm and contentment that I feel on a daily basis having done that.
Yeah, and I think as I went through that experience from an outside observer who's watching, it may have very well looked like for the first little while everything externally got worse, but I was okay with it because internally I was like, now is the outside's going down, the inside's on the up. Mm-hmm. But what I will say, and this is my own experience, and maybe it's coincidental, I don't think it is, with a lag, and it wasn't that long, my entire outside world started accelerating too, in ways that I couldn't possibly imagine. In ways that if I was trying to run the show or control, I wouldn't have done that. It wouldn't have turned out that way. But lo and behold, every aspect of my life began to become better as I started accepting God consciousness in my life.
Every aspect of what you began to invite into your life got better. But there are certain things in your life that you weren't able to have an effect on, right?
Right.
And you weren't able to change. But in your recognition of your inability to be able to do anything there, you were able to welcome change into the rest of your life. I say it because I'm qualifying that because this is not like this process, and it looks different for everybody. Isn't this process where all of a sudden I found God and my entire life is roses and sunshine and rainbows and unicorns?
Yeah, this is we're manifesting everything. It's not one of these new age things we're talking about here.
No, and there is inevitably things that have fallen apart and things that are broken and things that matter deeply that are broken that might be unresolved. And at the same time, other things are continuing to grow. Yeah.
Yeah. But I'd even add it differently than that. You said it before, like, and then one of the decisions I had to make when I started moving into God consciousness, is this thing benevolent? And it's like, absolutely, it's benevolent. And so even these places where, from an outside material plane perspective, it looks like actually that might have gone worse or whatnot. On the spiritual plane, internally, it's like, relate to them entirely different now. They're all every aspect is giving me something on a spiritual plane. That's the paradox. The paradox is what might be happening on a material plane that looks like it could be awful, it's painful, it's horrible. There's a tremendous benefit that occurs on the spiritual plane in terms of your ability to deepen unconditional love, deepen your capacity for peace, learn how to forgive, learn how to not judge. All of these are the spiritual gifts that come with every happening across the material plane. And it's a complete paradox. And from the outside materials view, it might look like, well, nothing's happening. There are things are getting worse. But there could be an earthquake of transformation going on inside of somebody who's now shifting into a spiritual plane, which is how I would relate to it. Every aspect of my life from a spiritual perspective and how I relate to those things has improved dramatically in ways I can't even explain.
And so from there, what you're saying is, and I'm just qualifying this for our audience, is that while things on the material plane might still look like chaos to an onlooker, what you've actually been able to do by embracing God and by surrendering is to find peace even in the chaos, and to be able to recognize that the chaos itself is an invitation to step into a deeper level of peace inside.
Absolutely. There's a saying that, religion is for people trying not to go to hell, and spirituality is for people who've already been there.
Yeah.
And there's this aspect of like, I've come to really accept the fact that it's like, there's this saying, and that if you look again, if you talk about the podcast, if you look at the backstories and lineage of saints, they're effectively nothing more than people who have found peace in the midst of suffering. There's no coming to consciousness without pain, and when we say it that way, the material plane provides this pain, and on the spiritual plane you transform it, and that's the only way to grow.
Yeah. And I don't believe that means that you need to be brought down to the deepest level of suffering and pain and be brought to your knees in order to be able to welcome God into your life.
Yeah, and your and our experience is very different in that sense. For me, I had this immense intellectual obstacle and hurdle that I had to overcome. I'm not particularly embodied, so I wasn't having these embodied experiences. I had to like almost like the whole wall had to get smashed down to allow an open-mindedness for this consciousness to come in. Like I was living from a place of ignorance, I'd call it, contempt prior to investigation, that despite the fact that, every culture around the world throughout time has written about this experience of God, I was rejecting it. Something had to happen for me to drop those walls and let it in. Your experience is different. You have a very embodied experience of God and God consciousness.
I think mine feels a little bit more ineffable than yours.
Right.
We've talked many times about how people who struggle, people who watch, people who come through addiction say like, man, I there's something about addiction that brings you to a place that's so dark and so deep that there's only one way up. And there's almost like an envy there for those of us that haven't been there, because you found that place. And I think for me, there's a very subtle, it's much more of a subtle whisper, right? And it's much more of a, what shows up for me as it relates to God is a longing for communion, a longing for connection, and an awareness. And it's something I'm still working with, or still exploring, I'd say, to release anything that's in the way of me being able to experience that. And there's a deep letting go that needs to happen, because what happens is that my world starts to look very different. I know when I'm in connection with and when I'm apart from. I know what that feels like in my body. In my body, in connection with, my heart feels open. My body feels like it's in flow. When that's absent, I experience physical pain. I experience constriction. And I've worked with pain in my body because of a neck injury that happened like 30 years ago. I broke my neck twice. And I've lived with lots of pain there for a long time. And my relationship to that pain for so long was I wanted to make it go away. I wanted to do anything that I could to make it go away. And especially over the last few years, what's happening for me is this real question of like, is my body trying to show me where I'm gripping and where I'm preventing flow from entering? And so now my inquiry into my body has become a lot stronger. And I find myself often, whether I'm doing my own meditation or breath work or whatever it is, or even preparing for my day, asking the question, like, show me where I am not in flow. Show me where I'm blocking, closing doors. And my experience is that it shows up for me in my physical body. And then my ask is to let go of that gripping so that I can be one with. Right?
Yeah.
Because this idea that we're separate from, which is something that most of us have grown up with for most of our lives, at least in our culture, is on some levels, it's insane. Like if you take the analogy of a wave in the ocean, there's a wave that's water rising and falling, but it's not separate from the ocean as a whole. It's just a part of, it's an expression of. And so our own individual expression of what is God consciousness, well, it's going to look different for each of us, right? Because we do have personalities and we do have egos, and we're walking on this plane with an opportunity to experience what God is for each of us. And how I experience God and how you experience God is going to look really different. How I experience God inside is there's a relaxing of my physical body. There's a quieting of my mind. And there's an opening to a vastness that's far bigger than my body could ever hold. It's almost a disembodiment on some level. Mm-hmm. And my experience of that over time has been to really fear those moments.
About to ask you that.
Because all of a sudden, I will have half a second, 30 seconds, a minute, where I don't feel my body and I almost gasp to come back. Because what does it mean to let go of your physical body? Well, in our world, it means death. But in the spiritual world of God consciousness, it just means you've transcended your body. You know, Joel Goldsmith calls this lifetime a parenthesis in eternity. Mm-hmm. It's just that. There's just two little quotation marks, and then we keep going. But I would imagine that you experience God entirely differently than that. Or at least somewhat different.
Yes and no. And again, it's more. I operate on more of an intellectual psyche level where it's less embodied in me, and it's more about. It's just this. In a, how to describe this? Like this real knowing and understanding that all of this, you, me, everything here, is just one connected field of consciousness that has taken this form. Part of it's my body, part of it's your body, part of it's this table. It's all just one field that's taken this form based on the consciousness of myself, you, and everyone around. This is what's manifesting. There's no separation between me and what I'm observing. So there's no separation between the observer and the observed. It feels so at home. It feels so right to me that that's how I experience God. It's like, I am God, you are God, God's within me. God is everywhere. And there is only God, which is also a sense and emotional state of unconditional love.
So I was just going to say, from that standpoint, of being able to see the world in that way, which his words sometimes don't compute in my little brain, but they might very much compute in yours.
And I don't think words are great at describing it. That's the problem.
It's ineffable.
Yeah, it's
right?
ineffable, right? So it's like we're at the edges of this thing trying to describe it.
But what you said at the end feels really poignant, which is, from this place, my experience is one of unconditional love. And I bring it up because we are living right now. We talked about polarity on one of our other calls. We're living in a world that is so polarized because I need to be right and you need to be wrong, or you need to be right and I need to be wrong. And our field becomes so small and constricted in that way, much the same way a muscle grips and tightens in the presence of fear, that there's no room for unconditional love. And yet, what we're needing in this world is the very thing that we're fighting against, right? We need that field of unity, of unconditional love, to be able to see the other as ourselves, to be able to see the divine in everything and everyone, to be able to accept what's going on around us as everybody, as an expression of ourselves in a lot of ways. Because what you're saying is, there isn't anything beyond you. This is one consciousness. Yeah. And yet we're fighting against it with everything that we've got. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, and you're right. It's like it's called the unity of consciousness for a reason. It's like at the highest level of consciousness, this where the Buddha arrived at, he realized, oh, I'm the only one here. I'm the only one that's ever been here. I'm every character that's ever existed. It's just me. There's nothing else. And at the very bottom of it, it's extreme polarity. Whereas the only way I'm going to survive is if I wipe you out. And then there's everything in between. And it's all the same realm. It's just how we're experiencing it. Nothing's changing except our experience of what's happening there.
But why do you think we fight against it so much?
That's the great mystery. I think that's part of the great mystery that's also ineffable. But it's almost like I believe as humans, we're born into God consciousness. We're completely pure and full of wonder. If you look in a newborn's baby eyes, it's God. You see it in there. You see it has no separation between its environment. It doesn't know it's different than its environment. It's been in its mother's womb for 9 months. It's just at one with everything. And then the duality and the separation all kicks in almost from day one. It's like recognizing to get its needs met, has to manipulate its environment. It learns to be separate. It's told it's separate. Everything has to be labeled and named and judged. And it's all about, for its whole upbringing, we're separating ourselves from our environment as part of this process until we think we're this ego separate identity that's in conflict and has to try to survive its environment. And then it's this process of having to let go of all that and find God consciousness again.
So, you talk about newborns, but I have to say that one of the things that brings me so much joy is in watching some of the people in my life who are in their 70s, 80s, who are now finding that same sparkle again.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I'm a newborn now.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you see somebody sparkling in that way, you see them remembering what's really true through a lifetime of masks and a lifetime of trying to be something or someone. There's something that happens as we get toward the end of life. And if we're lucky, something that happens midway through life, where we remember that we're not separate, where we remember that we can let go of all of those masks, all of the trying to be something, and are able to access our own remembering again. Because it's not a doing, this consciousness that we're speaking of. It's an undoing.
Yes. It's just a letting go of everything that keeps us separate from what we are. It's all spirituality is nothing more than a complete letting go of all the things we're identifying with, and it separates us from what we'll call God consciousness.
And in the physical body, it's an unwinding.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, this is a conversation that I think you and I will continue to have for a long time to come.
Yeah. I mean, again, my survey of as I went through my stage, and there's these stages of awakening, of drinking from a fire hose, of trying to understand what the hell is happening to me. What I came to the conclusion is every major religion in its purity is it's non-dualistic. Yeah. There is one God and we're it. They all say the same thing in different ways. That's just my view, by the way. I'm not a theologian. And the purpose of this life is to awaken to that. And we are served pain and obstacles as the method for us to do that. And if we accept it, we move.
And I love it. I mean, I know that we're out of time, but you use the word awakened all the time.
Yeah.
And I think I would use the word remember.
Sure.
There's a remembering, or there's an illumination of some kind. Yeah. Well, we'd love to hear your thoughts about this topic. If you want to share them with us, please write to us. And we hope you enjoyed the show.
Yeah. Thanks. We'll see you next time. You've been listening to me, Chris.
And me, Jacqueline, on Break Free and Trust, a redesign for living.
Tune in every second and fourth Monday at 3 p.m. on Transformation Talk Radio for more real conversations about life, death, and everything in between.
Learn to connect with your intrinsic power to grow and heal, how to laugh at your own humanness and not take life too seriously.
Through healthy conversations between the feminine and the masculine, you will learn how to harness the power of relationship and the mirror to befriend your shadow, and to trust that any obstacle that gets in your way is there to help you grow.
For more information or to connect with us personally, visit theway-healing.com. That's theway-healing.com.